Imagine a world without light, a world without warmth, a world dictated entirely by the rising and setting of the sun. Imagine a life spent in constant, gnawing fear. This was the planet Earth for 99.9% of human existence. This was the world of our ancestors, the hominid Homo erectus. Over 1.5 million years ago, on the vast savannas of Africa, we were not the planet's dominant species. We were not masters of our destiny. We were prey. Life was a desperate daily struggle. Daylight hours were a frantic search for food, scavenging carcasses, digging for tough tubers, avoiding predators. But when that sun dipped below the horizon, a primal terror took hold. The long, cold, pitch-black night belonged to them. The saber-toothed cats, the giant hyenas, the dire wolves. Their eyes pierced the darkness. Their claws were sharp. Our ancestors, small, slow, and soft-skinned, had only one defense: climb a tree, find a cave, and pray for dawn. This was a world without fire.
Fire existed, of course, but it was not a tool, it was a monster. It came from the sky as a blinding flash of lightning, tearing trees asunder and sparking terrifying wildfires that consumed the landscape. It bubbled from the earth in volcanic flows. All living things shared a single, hardwired instinct in the face of this force: run. Fire was destruction. Fire was death. But something changed. A new kind of mind was emerging on the planet, a mind capable of looking past the immediate terror and seeing a possibility. We will never know precisely when or where it first happened, but picture this. A violent thunderstorm has swept the savanna. A bolt of lightning strikes a dead acacia tree. The fire rages, and our ancestors, a small band of Homo erectus, flee with the rest of the animals. But later, driven by hunger, they cautiously return. The air is thick with smoke, the ground is charred, and they find something new: the carcass of a zebra caught in the blaze. It is not raw, it is cooked. The meat is tender, it pulls apart easily. It tastes not of rot, but of rich, life-giving fat. And there, in the smoldering ruins of the acacia tree, is another discovery: a glowing ember. It is not a raging monster. It is a flickering thing, and it is warm. This, perhaps, was the first harvest, the first act of courage that would change our species forever. A brave individual, or perhaps a small cooperating group, defied millennia of instinct. They didn't just run from the fire, they approached it. The first great challenge was not making fire, it was stealing it. It was taming it. They would have used a long branch, perhaps, to scoop up a glowing coal. They would have carried this precious, dangerous ember back to their cave or shelter, and then the second challenge began: keeping it alive. This single task would have revolutionized their small society. The fire was a greedy, fragile god. It demanded constant attention. It needed to be fed. Dry wood, dried dung, grasses, all had to be gathered, stored, and carefully added. It's likely this became a full-time job. One member of the group, perhaps an elder or someone injured, would become the first fire keeper. Their role was sacred. If they let the fire die, the group was plunged back into the dark, back into the cold, back into a world of terror. The pressure would have been immense. This single stolen flame was the first light of human consciousness. It was the first act of defiance against the cold, dark universe. Humans had captured a piece of the sun.
For hundreds of thousands of years, this may have been the extent of it. Fire was a shield. It was warmth. But the most profound revolution was yet to come. It wouldn't just happen around them. It would happen inside them. The great what-if moment was inevitable. If fire could cook a zebra killed by lightning, what if we put our own food into the flame? This is the cooking hypothesis, a powerful idea championed by primatologist Richard Wrangham. He argues that cooking was not just a convenience. It was the single most important evolutionary driver in our history. To understand why, you have to understand the energy budget of a raw food diet. Our closest living relatives, chimpanzees, spend up to 6 hours a day just chewing. Their entire lives are dedicated to finding and processing tough, fibrous, low-quality plant matter. Our Homo erectus ancestors were no different. Their diet of raw meat and tough underground tubers was incredibly difficult to digest. The human body is like a business. It has a limited energy budget, and in our ancestors, the vast majority of that budget was spent on one department: digestion. Think of cooking as external digestion. When you apply heat to food, you're outsourcing the hardest work. The chemical bonds of tough proteins and dense starches are broken down before they even enter your mouth. Cell walls in plants, which lock away nutrients, burst open. Collagen in meat melts into easily digestible gelatin. Pathogens and bacteria are neutralized. Suddenly, food that was barely worth the effort to eat, like a starchy potato or a fibrous piece of meat, became a caloric goldmine. Our ancestors were getting vastly more energy for vastly less work. This had a visible biological consequence. We can see it in the fossil record. As Homo erectus evolved, something radical happened to their bodies. Their digestive tracts, their stomachs, their intestines began to shrink. A chimp has a massive, pot-bellied gut, necessary for fermenting all that raw plant matter. A modern human's gut is comparatively tiny. Why? Because cooked food is so easy to absorb. We no longer needed that giant, energy-guzzling internal factory. Our jaws and teeth also shrank. We no longer needed massive, powerful molars to grind tough fibers for hours on end. This created a massive surplus in the human body's energy budget. The factory was suddenly lean, efficient, and wildly profitable. And this leads to the central, beautiful question. Where did all that surplus energy go? It was diverted to the most biologically expensive organ we possess, the one that, even at rest, consumes 20% of our body's calories: the brain. This is the expensive tissue hypothesis. You cannot have a large, complex brain and a large, complex gut at the same time. The metabolic cost is too high. Our ancestors, by taming fire and cooking their food, made an evolutionary trade-off. We traded guts for brains. Fire didn't just warm our hands. It didn't just fill our bellies. It built our minds. With every cooked meal, for 1,000,000 years, we were feeding that hungry, growing 3-pound universe inside our skulls. The Homo erectus brain was about 50% larger than its predecessor. The brain of our own species, Homo sapiens, is larger still. This cognitive explosion, the capacity for complex thought, for planning, for memory, for empathy, was funded entirely by the calories unlocked from the flame. We didn't just discover fire. Fire discovered us. The revolution happening inside our skulls was mirrored by a revolution in our society. The taming of fire didn't just change our bodies, it changed our behavior. It forged the very foundations of community. The first and most immediate change was safety. The equation of the savannah was rewritten overnight. A small band of hominids, huddled in the dark, was a target. But a small band of hominids around a blazing campfire, they were a fortress. Fire is a universal language of stay away to the animal kingdom. No saber-toothed cat, no matter how powerful, would willingly leap through a flame wall. For the first time in our history, we were no longer hiding from the dark. We owned the dark. Imagine the profound psychological shift. The end of the sun was no longer the end of active life. It was the beginning of a new, safe part of the day. This safety created something we now take for granted: the evening, the night. This brings us to fire's second great social gift. It created the first living room. Before fire, social bonding was limited to daylight hours, competing with the urgent tasks of foraging and survival. But now the group had hours of secure time together. The fire became a central hearth, a focal point that literally drew people in. In the flickering light of this new artificial day, our ancestors gathered. They were no longer just a collection of individuals, they were a community. This is where everything we call culture was born. Around the fire, they would have made and repaired tools. They would have shared the new abundance of cooked food, a profoundly social act that builds trust and reciprocity. And most critically, they would have talked. Many linguists believe this is the cradle of complex language. You don't need complex grammar to point to a fruit tree, but around the fire, you have time. You have a shared focus. You have the need to communicate more complex ideas. This is where storytelling could begin. A hunter recounting the day's near miss, an elder passing down knowledge. This is where myths were born, where rituals were formed, where the first us was forged. The fire was a social magnet, binding the group together in a shared experience of warmth, safety, and cooperation. And this newfound time and safety also fueled our third revolution: technology. Fire was not just a shield, it was a tool. Our ancestors learned that fire could change the very properties of matter. The most basic evidence for this comes from wooden tools. A simple pointed stick is a mediocre weapon, but a pointed stick hardened in the embers of a fire, its tip becomes significantly tougher, more durable, and more lethal. In Schoningen, Germany, archaeologists found a stunning collection of wooden spears dating back 300,000 years. They are so perfectly balanced and crafted, they are considered the first true designed hunting weapons, and their tips show clear evidence of being fire-hardened. This was not an accident. This was engineering. Fire also transformed our stone tool making. Many types of stone, like chert or flint, are difficult to flake into sharp edges. But if you carefully heat the stone in a fire, a process called heat treatment, you can change its internal structure, making it stronger, less brittle, and far easier to shape into a deadly point or a precision blade. Our ancestors were now an entirely new kind of creature. They were a creature that cooked its food, fueling a giant brain. A creature that gathered in social groups, protected by a wall of flame. And a creature that used that same flame to engineer deadlier weapons and sharper tools. We were no longer just surviving nature. We were beginning to control it.
For over 1 million years, we were fire tamers. We were fire keepers. We were reliant on the generosity of the sky or the luck of finding a natural ember. The death of the fire was a catastrophe. But at some point, our ancestors made the final Promethean leap. We stopped harvesting fire, and we started making it. This is the moment we truly stole the fire from the gods. We became masters of the flame. This invention was so profound, it was likely discovered independently in many places by different species of human, including both our own, Homo sapiens, and our cousins, the Neanderthals. There are two fundamental methods. The first is percussion. This is the classic flint and steel method, though in prehistory, it was likely flint striking against a piece of iron pyrite. When struck, pyrite releases hot sparks. If these sparks land on a tinder bundle of dry fungus or charred moss, a skilled hand can coax them into a flame. This is a technology of patience and precision. The second method is friction. The hand drill, the fire plow, or the later more advanced bow drill. By rapidly spinning a piece of hard wood against a softer hearth board, you generate intense friction. This friction creates a fine black powder of wood dust that heats up until it smolders into a single precious ember. Imagine the person who first achieved this. Imagine the hours of failed, frustrating, blister-inducing work. And then, a wisp of smoke. A tiny red coal. The power to create life-giving warmth on demand. This was true freedom. This was power. With the ability to make fire, humanity was now unbound. We were no longer tied to a single sacred hearth. We could carry the idea of fire, the knowledge of how to create it, with us. This is what allowed Homo sapiens to conquer the globe. Fire was the environmental suit. It was the portable habitat that allowed a small, hairless African primate to leave its tropical homeland and survive the brutal, frozen hellscapes of the Ice Ages. We walked into the frozen north of Europe, into the vastness of Siberia. We faced glaciers and mammoths, and we survived because we carried our own artificial sun. We built hearths in frozen caves. We melted ice for water. We cooked frozen meat. We were, in every sense of the word, the fire bringers. This mastery of fire, this Promethean leap, is the spark that lit the fuse of civilization. The entire human story from this point forward is a story of fire. It was fire that allowed us to harden clay into the first pottery, allowing us to store food and water. It was fire that allowed us to melt sand into glass. It was fire that allowed us to smelt rocks into metal, first copper, then bronze, then iron, launching us out of the Stone Age and into a new world of plows, swords, and empires. Our entire civilization is built on the mastery of this single chemical reaction. The steam engine that powered the Industrial Revolution, that was just a more sophisticated campfire, boiling water to move pistons. The internal combustion engine that powers our cars and planes, our tiny controlled explosions. Fire in a bottle. The power plants that light our cities and run our computers. They are fueled by burning coal, natural gas, or the contained fire of a nuclear reaction. We have come a long way from that terrified hominid, shivering in a tree. But we must never forget that every part of our modern world, our technology, our society, our very biology, was forged in that first flame. It was the greatest story ever told. The story of a creature that defied instinct, captured a monster, and used it to build a mind. The story of how fire, in its infinite power and terrible beauty, truly and completely made us human.